How's it going, everyone? Today I'm excited to answer a burning question that a lot of you will have. What's the best classes and builds for those classes currently in Diablo 4? I certainly know I was wondering this myself. Well, the guys over at Mobalytics have a tier list up with B, A and S tier options and builds for us to currently try out. The link to this will be down below in the description so you can see the written versions of these builds for yourself. But as you can see from the tier list, we have quite a few options for several of the classes, although the Sorcerer is currently missing from the S tier options, but I will be including one of the A tier builds for Sorcerer because you don't have to choose an S tier build. I personally am going to be going with one of these A tier Sorcerer builds because I just love the Sorcerer so much. But if you want to pick one of these S tier options so that you can go through the dungeons and get your loot and gear and legendaries even faster while dishing out a ton of damage, then that might be a pretty good way to go depending on what class you plan to play. Just a quick note, the gameplay that we will show for these different classes and builds may come from our own gameplay in the past or other creators who will be credited on screen and in the description. So we'll try to show you something as relevant as possible for each of the classes and their builds. But let's jump into it with the very first one. You can see here the Twisting Blades Rogue build. The great thing here is that we can expand on it, and then on the actual written build, we have everything that we will need to make this build for ourselves. We have all of the skills, how many points we're putting into those skills, the aspect that we want on every different armor piece, even the actual stat priority for each armor piece as well. They have everything, and it's absolutely great because this is going to be super important when you're farming and you're getting loads of different gear drops. You need to pay attention to the stats that's dropping on them so that you can basically have exactly what you need, because some of these builds will be reliant on certain legendaries or different aspects, while others will be more reliant on the different stats depending on how they will synergize together. So getting the actual stats that you need on each gear piece, as well as the different aspects or legendary perks, will be important depending on the build. But as you can see, everything's on here that you'll basically need to know, including what you want to go on for your Paragon board if you are, for example, playing this Twisted Blades Rogue build. But this build is all about being highly mobile while also delivering devastating damage output. The thing about Twisting Blades is that it costs a lot of your resource, but has some of the highest base damage of any skills in the game so far, as well as it being a relatively decent AoE. But the insane thing about the Rogue is that you get the specialization of Inner Sight that essentially lets you cast Twisting Blades for free for 4 whole seconds. And when you have this full build made, it's not that hard to proc it, and it has a rough uptime of about 75%, so you will be spamming Twisting Blades and putting out some insane damage on both groups of enemies and individual bosses. The build will also utilize the aspect of the Umbral for extra resource generation through your crowd control. You also have Poison Imbuement and Poison Trap to provide additional damage and burst potential. But to keep you a little bit survivable, you also have Dark Shroud for its damage reduction, and defensive aspects such as Cheat's Aspect and Aspect of Disobedience to give you that extra survivability as well. All of the information on what exactly all of these things do and how they function is in the written version of the build. There is of course so many different ways and directions you can go when you are leveling up your class, so having a build that you're aiming for that you know is a top tier build and puts out a good amount of damage is always a good and helpful thing. So if you are thinking about picking up Rogue, the Twisting Blades build might be the one for you. However, if you are thinking about being a Necromancer, you may have heard people raving about the Bone Spear build. I've certainly seen a lot of people using it so far. Once again, you can see on the screen all of the different skills and the exact points that you want to put in them, the aspects to pick, again the stat priority which is important, as well as the gems to slot in as well. This Bone Spear build also has a few uniques that you are going to want to get. The Grandfather is an absolutely insane one. I think pretty much everyone will want to get this regardless of what your build is, with a few exceptions. This one gives you a massive critical strike damage bonus up to 100%, so that is going to be a massive damage bonus depending on your build. For this one, it's going to be really helpful as well. But you also want the Deathless Visage and also this leg piece, which will essentially give you barriers beyond your maximum health. So this build is all about using the Bone Spear. It excels in maximizing your damage output based on the maximum amount of essence that you currently have. And when you combine that with high critical strike proficiency and crit damage, you have some pretty high damage output potential. You can also see the gameplay loop, which is really helpful for just getting a bit more understanding about the build. So with this one, we want to cast Decryptify to slow and weaken the enemies, then Bone Storm and be eating those corpses to increase its duration. Then you want to pop Corpse Tendril and then spam your Bone Spear, but don't go below 60% mana, wait for it to refill back up so you can get the most damage out of it. Overall, this Bone Spear build does require a lot of management over your essence, your class resource, so if you don't mind juggling your resource management, you can put out some pretty meaty damage with this Necromancer build. But next up, let's switch over to the Druid with the Storm Lightning Wolf. This one is actually pretty cool. It's going to have some big synergies, and again, you can see all of the different skills, the amount of points that you put in them, the different aspects for each individual weapon, the unique items that you will want, Tempest Roar and the same pants again, and then you will also want these stats as well. Stats do play a big role, especially as you start to get to the higher and higher levels, and that's where you start to really see them come into play. But for this build, we're basically revolving around the aspect of the Rampaging Werebeast, which aims to maximize our critical damage by generating frequent critical hits. Essentially, for every crit hit, you build your crit damage. And when you have something like the Keystone passive Earthen Might, which gives you a 100% crit chance for 5 seconds, you can really rack that crit damage up on this build. The thing is that this passive can actually be easily activated with our AoE attacks and our lucky hit chance. So you can get some pretty high crazy hits and damage numbers on this Druid build. You also have Overcharged Aspect and Lightning Dancer's Aspect to help contribute to even more critical hit chance, which then goes and feeds into higher critical hit damage. So this is definitely one to think about if you are pondering on the choice of picking a Druid as your main. This is definitely a solid build to go with. But next we have the HOTA Barbarian, which basically refers to the Hammer of the Ancient skill. And there's a ton of synergies in this one, and it definitely has a very unique and interesting playstyle. Again, you can see all of the skills and the points that you want to put in them on the written version of the build, as well as the different aspects, stats, and gems to slot in. And again, there's a few different unique items that you want to look out for this build, because they just straight up improve the way it plays. But for this one, we are basically focusing on maximizing the power of our Supreme Wrath of the Berserker, and then by spending Fury, we gain additional damage bonuses. Combining that with Unbridled Rage and Aspect of Echoing Fury, it will increase the cost of our already high cost Hammer of the Ancients, which will then increase its damage so we're hitting super hard. We essentially get a 25% damage bonus for every 50 Fury that we spend. And when we use Unbridled Rage to double the cost of our Hammer of the Ancients, we can get up to 135% increased damage on it, making it hit pretty hard. There is another Berserker build that you may be wondering about, which we'll go over soon. But next up, we need to go back to the Druid, because there's another slight variation on the previous Druid build, but this one does have a few variations in the skills that we pick. Primarily, the biggest difference is that we're going to invest a lot into Tornado. This one also focuses on the Rampaging Werebeast aspect, which will then give us that extra crit damage based on how often we crit. It's again using that Earthen Might Keystone so that we can get that 100% crit chance when we damage enemies with Earth skills. So depending on which version of the Druid build you want to try out, you could even try both of them out and see which one works for you. These are two very solid options. But next we have to talk about the Whirlwind Barbarian, because this is a super fun playstyle. This one has you zooming around at very high speed, spin to winning, a classic Barbarian skill that I think we can all agree is just very fun to use. You can once again see all of the skills that you actually want to invest in, the different aspects, the Paragon board recommendations, the stat priority, and the gems you want to slot in, and again it also has the unique items that you will probably want to get if you want to make the most out of this build. But this one focuses around snapshotting damage buffs while channeling your Whirlwind for maximum effectiveness. You're going to have high move speed, so you're going to be clearing dungeons very quickly while you're spin to winning, and it's great as a group because you're going to be very fast and you're going to be putting out a lot of AoE damage. This one actually can get you up to 100% bonus move speed, which means you will be flying through dungeons. Remember, at higher levels you will be farming Nightmare dungeons for both gear as well as XP. So if you can move faster, clear dungeons quicker, you're also going to be leveling faster and getting your drops even easier. But finally, let's go over a Sorcerer build, because that's the class that I'm going to play, and there currently isn't an S tier option, at least right now. But do remember, as the game is played and as more people level up, different builds and things will probably start coming up and overtaking some of these builds, so while Sorcerer right now as of this moment doesn't have an S tier, it doesn't mean it won't have one in the future. I'm going to look at the A tier Frozen Sarcophagus build, which is a pretty classic Sorcerer build that focuses around using our Ice and Frost spells. You can see here all of the skills and where to put your points. You also have each of your aspects that you want to be using, even down to the unique items again, as well as your stat priority and the gems that you want to slot in. But this build focuses on Ice Shards as our main damage dealer. We're going to be using Ice Armor and managing our cooldowns to increase our tankiness. We also have Frost Nova to freeze enemies, which also increases our damage and applies vulnerability to them, and Shatter to make enemies explode, dealing more AoE. Ice Blades is a nice thing to have as well for extra vulnerability procs and to reduce our cooldowns, and has a chance to cast Frost Nova. And then our ultimate Deep Freeze, which is one of my personal favourites for Sorcerer, is kind of like a get out of jail free card for a bit more burst damage and utility. I have seen others utilising an Arc Lash Sorcerer build, which definitely looks interesting as well. But I do really like the look of this Frost Sorcerer build, so I might end up going with this one, but we'll wait and see. So tell me, which one of these builds are you going to try out and which class are you going with? As of the tier list right now, it's looking like the Rogue, Druid, Necromancer and Barbarian have some pretty sweet options, but don't sleep on the Sorcerer because I'm sure some spicy builds will come out over time. So thank you for watching, and the two videos on screen now we think you'll really enjoy if you did enjoy this one. You don't have to watch them if you don't want to, but if you did enjoy this video, you're probably going to like these ones too. And then tell us what you think after watching in the comments down below.